You're listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting us be part of your day. My name is Jerry Mitchell. Sitting next to me, dancing to the beat of the music, is Myra.
Hi, everyone.
My little bit of enjoyment on Mondays and Thursdays, watching you sit there and conduct the orchestra.
Well, when you have two earpieces in and one's delayed, it's so you know what's happening.
Yeah, I know. Yes, we do our own sound production here. We don't. This is a little makeshift studio. We just kind of sit here and do our thing, but that's okay.
We're glad that you put up with us.
Yes, we are. If you so choose, the chat room is open. For those who have a free Spreaker account, you can certainly comment. We welcome that. Actually, even if you comment on some of the older stuff we've done, if you go back and listening to some of those, I got one of those this week. Appreciate that. And always glad to see and hear people's input about what we do. We also get some questions, and not just from our listeners, from a lot of different sources, and everybody with everything that's going on says, where do you think we are in this Revelation timeline? And I'm like, what do you mean? What are you talking about, the Revelation timeline? We're not there yet. Kind of. And they look at me funny. And I have to remind people from time to time that, Isaiah does write that the Almighty tells us the end from the beginning. So if you think you're going to look at the end of the book to see what's going to happen, maybe you ought to look at the beginning of the book. And that will give you a pretty good indication of what to look for. And one of the reasons that people come up with this, and it's happened a few times this week in some of the conversations I've had with folks, the Afghanistan debacle is still very fresh on everybody's minds, and it's still very, very fresh in their hearts. The image that we have of the children, the babies, hanging in the concertina wire still causes stomachs to turn, right? Or it should. It should make you sick to your stomach. There was a busload of women who was stopped trying to cross the border. They didn't get across. They were removed from the bus and executed. And the sad part is, all of that could have been avoided. All of that could have been and should have been avoided. And I'm going to mainly speak to the American audience for a moment. And I'm going to say this. Our senators, the United States Senate, should be issuing arrest warrants for Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Adam Schiff, and everybody else who had a part in what happened. If that includes the entire presidential cabinet, then let it include the entire presidential cabinet. Anybody who had input needs to stand trial for treason. It's that simple. Use the word treason, because that's what it is. We can't allow something like this to continue without the punishment that is required by the United States Constitution. And by the way, that punishment is still hanging. Okay? Just saying. What this administration did to the Americans in Afghanistan and in the United States is horrific enough. But what they did to our allies, find me another negative adjective that we could use. And if that's not bad enough, what we did to the people in Afghanistan, the Afghan nationals who helped us in our effort to deter terror, what we did to them is nothing short of terrorism itself. We're here to help you. Okay. Help us help you. Well, we'll help you help us. That's what they said. And we abandoned them. And then we gave a list of names of the people who helped us to the Taliban. They shot people for less after the Nuremberg trials. Okay, this is war crimes. This is war crimes. That's all it is. Let's call it what it is. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, but there's a picture of a United States helicopter being flown by the Taliban with one of the people who assisted the United States hanging underneath. And yes, they were hanging from their neck. It wasn't on purpose. They had, just basically tied a rope around their neck and took off. You know what? The only way that the American people will be able to even begin to make up for this stuff is if we severely punish everyone responsible. That's what it's going to take. Now, do I honestly believe that that's going to happen? I wish it would happen, but I don't think it will. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen because I read the beginning of the book. When we think about these things, it really is amazing what's going on. People are so concerned about the end times that they forget that everything that's happening right now has already been done. Maybe not on the scale of what's going on right now, but it's already happened. Meyer's going to read Solomon's introduction to Ecclesiastes, and down through verse 11 of chapter 1.
These are the words of the teacher. He is a son of David, king in Jerusalem. The teacher says, useless, useless, completely useless. All things are useless. What do people really gain from all the hard work they do here on earth? Things never change. People live, people die. But the earth continues forever. The sun rises, the sun sets. Then it hurries back to the place where it rises again. The wind blows to the south. The wind blows to the north. It blows from one direction, then the other. Then it turns around and repeats the same pattern, going nowhere. All the rivers flow to the sea, but the sea never becomes full. Everything is boring. It makes you so tired you don't even want to talk about it. Words come again and again to our ears, but we never can hear enough, nor can we ever really see all we want to see. All things continue the way they have been since the beginning. The same things will be done that have always been done. There is nothing new here on earth. A person may say, "Look, that is new." But really, it has always been there. It was there before we were. People don't remember what happened long ago. In the future, people will not remember what happens now. And later, other people will not remember what was done before them.
And it's gotten worse. Not only do people not remember what happened long ago, people don't remember what happened 5 minutes ago. People experience things and then they forget. We've all had, we have all the lessons from history. It's written down for us, but we continually repeat the same mistakes. This happens, that happens, good happens, bad happens, and still we make the same mistakes. And what I'm going to say tonight, for some of you, you're going to think I've become one of those crazy conspiracy theorists. Well, stick with me till I'm done, and you might realize that what I'm going to say isn't necessarily a theory put in the context of what we just read from Solomon's Ecclesiastes, chapter 1. In this particular International Children's Bible, it says there's nothing new here on earth. Other translations say there's nothing new under the sun, right? Which is the same place, just a different way of saying it. When I went to bed last night, I knew exactly what I was going to talk about tonight. I just knew I was going to talk, because I don't spend a lot of time talking about the grace that the Almighty gives to us, but that's what I had planned on talking about. And at about 3:45 this morning, I woke up and I had had a really weird dream. Because for some reason, I woke up and I had been dreaming about reading Exodus chapter 1. How the Hebrew people had become enslaved. Not necessarily going on to them leaving, but how they were able to be enslaved by the Egyptians. And it's kind of strange, because that's what we think of as a springtime story, right? I mean, we read that at Passover. And here we're coming up on the fall feast. More about that on Monday, by the way. We're coming up on the fall feast, and I'm dreaming about Exodus chapter 1. That just didn't make sense to me in my mind. And I've looked at that chapter a lot, but there's one phrase that I couldn't get out of my mind at 3:45 this morning. And that was Pharaoh wanted to deal wisely with the children of Abraham. Now, the Hebrew word used here is chachem. And in that context, it really can indicate to us that what Pharaoh wanted to do was divide and tame the mighty. He was willing to divide and conquer what he viewed as his enemy. And Meyer's going to read this passage, and I want you to think about the comparisons we see going on today, because this is interesting. Do you want me to read the first couple verses and get through the names for you? All right. When Yaakov also called Israel went into Egypt, he took his sons, and each son took his own family with him. These are the names of the sons of Israel: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Can you go from there? Okay.
There was a total of 70 who were descendants of Jacob. Jacob's son Joseph was already in Egypt. By some time later, Joseph and his brothers had died, along with all the people who had lived at that same time. But the people of Israel had many children, and their number grew greatly. They became very strong, and the country of Egypt was filled with them. Trouble for the people of Israel. Then the new king began to rule Egypt. He did not know who Joseph was. The king said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel are too many, and they are too strong for us to handle. We must make plans against them. If we don't, the number of their people will grow even more. Then if there is war, they might join our enemies. Then they could fight us and escape from the country. So the Egyptians made life hard for the people of Israel. They put slave master over the Israelites. The slave masters forced the Israelites to build the cities of Patam and Ramesses for the king. These cities were supply centers in which the Egyptians stored things. The Egyptians forced the Israelites to work even harder, but this made the Israelites grow in number and spread more. So the Egyptians became more afraid of them. They forced the Israelites to work even harder. The Egyptians made life hard for the Israelites. They forced the Israelites to work very hard, making bricks and mortar. They also forced them to do all kinds of hard work in the fields. The Egyptians were not merciful to them in all their hard work.
Okay, now the Hebrew people had been living very, very well in Egypt. They lived in an area called Goshen, and it was the prime place to be in Egypt at the time. But just after a couple of generations, okay, the political landscape began to change for them. There was a new leader, and we need to make sure that we understand that this Pharaoh knew the history of Egypt. You know, you don't take over a nation that like Egypt without knowing the history. So, you know, when it says that he didn't know who the Hebrew people were, he's not talking about, he didn't know there were all these Hebrew people in Egypt. He knew exactly who they were. He probably knew how many they were. What it's actually saying there is he really didn't like them like his predecessors may have liked them. It didn't matter to him that they had actually helped save the nation of Israel, Egypt, right? It was Joseph's guidance that brought Egypt through one of the worst famines in its history. If you go to Egypt today, there are places still named for Joseph. They know who he was. They didn't forget him. But this particular Pharaoh decided he didn't like these foreigners living in the best part of Egypt, maybe. Maybe he had other intentions. You know, he didn't really recognize all the contributions that the Hebrew people had given to Egypt, and he didn't care. He refused to let anything that was good be remembered. And he did this in an interesting way. It says they dealt shrewdly or wisely with them. He was ready to divide them. He was ready to tame them because he felt they were mightier than he was. And he really knew that nobody in Egypt would go along with a flat-out, straight campaign of distrust. You know, he actually needed to take some steps to, well, you know how you do. You get this group of people and one or two, and you whisper in their ear a little bit, and then you go whisper in somebody else's ear, and they start talking about things. And before you know it, this group of people over here don't like that group of people over there, and that group of people over there don't like that group of people over there. Wasn't it Solomon that said nothing new here on earth? See, nothing that we're experiencing today is different than what was going on in Egypt almost 4,000 years ago. Because he was able to divide the people, and at this point, it was just solely dividing them between being Egyptian or being Hebrew, right? I mean, there wasn't they didn't have the convenience of the race thing, because you could be a black Egyptian or a white Egyptian. You could be a black Hebrew or a white Hebrew. They did, it was complicated. All right, you might not know somebody was one thing or the other just by the color of their skin. You had to know who you were dealing with. And it's still kind of that way over there today between the Palestinians and the Jewish folks. There's, because you can have, black Palestinians. You can have black Jewish people. That's just the way it works. You've got to know who your enemy is, so to speak. When they were dividing the people between Egyptian and Hebrew, all that the leaders had to worry about was making sure that these folks, the group over here, Group A, didn't like Group B. That was all they needed to worry about. Now think about what's going on in the world today. Maybe I should say, think about what's been going on in the world for the past several decades. When I was in elementary school, close to 50 years ago now, the racial divide was almost closed. The whole black, white, red, tan, purple, green thing, that was just kind of replaced with, well, you're different, so what? At least in the area I grew up. Now, there were still places where it wasn't that way. We were very fortunate in the area I grew up in. Somebody that I went to school with were still fairly good friends, right? You've heard him he was on this show about a year ago. So, the whole race thing didn't matter to us then. And along came a fellow by the name of Lyndon Johnson. He had a different idea. And he used his position to promote his hatred for people who were less than what he considered acceptable. Now, around the world, people are being divided in ways they've never been divided before now. Not just with race, but they were beginning to be divided by religion. Israel had just won the 1967 war. Right? The Arabs, as they were known then, were, and this is going to sound funny, they were far more honorable than the members of ISIS or the Taliban today. Back then they actually believed in nation over religion. Back then they believed in family over ideology. Not today, not with the ISIS and Taliban today. That mentality is way out the window. Let's fast forward to the Jimmy Carter problem. Jimmy Carter allowed the radicals to depose the Shah of Iran. Carter refused to give any aid to the Shah or the Iranian army. He allowed the mullahs to depose the Shah and take over the country. He allowed that same radical group to hold over 400 American hostages for, 3 years? 3.5 years? Something like that? Yeah. What that did was that empowered the radical Muslims. And many, by the way, the average Muslim despises. Today we have this kind of a weird divide between Christian and Muslim, because we, I shouldn't say we, Christians view the Muslims as the bad guy. It's kind of like, this is going to sound odd too, but it's kind of like blaming the gun because somebody got shot. It's not the religion that's the bad guy, it's the people using and hiding behind religion who are the bad guys. It's created an us against them mentality. And it's not good versus evil mentality. It's us against them, just like it was in Egypt. Now, around the world, there began to be a black versus white race issue all over again. It was us versus them. In an era of productivity all around the world. Nations, underdeveloped countries were actually coming together. They were doing things. They were producing things. The Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States was winding down anyway. Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev basically just finished what was already started. But it was still us against them. And the stage was set for the natural progression of the people around the world who had practically come together just after World War II. Other than a few places, there's always going to be some local issues. But just like Pharaoh was able to divide the people in Egypt, now, on a much, much larger scale, worldwide scale, people were beginning to divide themselves. Us versus them. And it's no longer just Group A dislikes Group B. Now it's Group A dislikes Group B and Group C dislikes Group B and Group D. You see how that works, right? You divide the mighty, because united, the people are mighty. But it didn't matter who the us was. It didn't matter who the them is. It was always the us versus them. And that's what it is today. The leaders on a worldwide scale right now think they're in control of their nations. But they're not. They're being played. They're being played. And they're being played by the enemy of the Creator. And these people have no idea what they're doing. World leaders are choosing not to acknowledge the Almighty, not to acknowledge the benefits of the hundreds of millions of people that they are leading, that they could turn this around in a very short time. Instead, they're lusting after power. Because the enemy says, I can put you in control. Let's fast forward to what we're looking at today when we're experiencing exactly what the Hebrew and Egyptian people were experiencing almost 4,000 years ago. Humankind is more divided than ever before, but why? Who's it going to benefit when you put people against people? If people are divided, their tendency to work together is severely diminished. And today we're divided by race and sex and religion, political ideology, financial status, and something we've never been divided by before. And that's your medical vaccination status. You're being divided over an injection. Did you know that? You're being divided by an injection. Now, I'm want to keep this short, so I'm not going to go into the whole vaccine versus unvaxxed thing, even though the vaccinated can still pass the virus to both the vaccinated people and the unvaccinated people. I'm not going to go into that. I guess I just did, didn't I? Just because you have the vaccine doesn't mean you can't get it, and it doesn't mean you can't pass it along. So, more importantly, when you're divided, if we look back at the examples throughout history, especially the division in Egypt, it's easier to enslave a group of people when you're divided. Around the world, people are being forced to do things they've never done. You're either going to get vaccinated, you're going to wear a mask, or you're going to stay home. In Australia, last week or the week before, I think it was week before, they had one instance of a Delta variant, and the police were arresting people who were walking down the street. If you left your home, you got arrested. That's how crazy this is. In the United States, people are being paid not to go to work. And yet they still want to be able to get online or pick up the phone and order whatever they think they want. And they expect it to be delivered to their door by people who are getting paid to stay home. Does that make sense to anybody? Think about that. If you're getting paid to stay home, excuse me, and you know that other people are getting paid to stay home, how do you expect to order something and have it delivered to your door? Who's going to make it? Who's going to package it? Who's going to ship it? Who's going to be the delivery person? You think we're not living in biblical times? You're there. You're just not where you think you are. You know, it amazes me. It really does amaze me. Parts of Europe, businesses are being taken over by the government because the people can no longer afford to remain in business. Nobody's going there. So the government is taking over the business and forcing the people to work. The people who used to own it. I can't remember what country that was, though. I couldn't go back and find that article. But it was really, really weird to me that you can have a government take over your business and then tell you you have to be there. Even though you're essential, even though nobody can come shop here because they're all supposed to be staying home. Isn't that amazing? What we are actually... This is terrible. What we're actually witnessing is the enslavement of humankind, not just in one country, but around the world. You might not think you're being enslaved, but you're being enslaved. You know, this isn't about the vaccine or the virus. It's about controlling the crowd. It's about dividing and taming the mighty, because together, human beings, humankind, are powerful. Far more powerful than the idiots we have thinking they're running their nations. Do you want to eat today? Produce your share of the product. Want your children to produce your share of the... Want to have children? I should have said it that way. When you want to have children, what service are you capable of rendering? Want to be warm? You got to produce something. Want to live? Produce. See, this isn't about a virus. This isn't about a vaccine. This isn't about black or white. This is about creating a slave race. And it happens to be everybody who is not fortunate enough. That's a weird way to say that for what I'm about to say. Everybody who is not in the line of being a political leader in their nation. Doesn't matter what nation you're in. Everything that's happening today has been told to us before, and not just in the Bible. They stopped hiding years ago. You ever watched the old Star Trek show? People get a kick when I use this analogy. In the old Star Trek television show, there was never any currency exchanged. Never. If you wanted something, you'd walk up to a computer and tell it what you wanted. Or, well, I guess originally you had to punch the buttons in, right? I mean, they didn't know what voice commands were for a computer when it first came out. But you just walk up to a computer and you'd ask. It would give it to you. But what you didn't see was the slave labor that made it possible for those things to be available. Now, of course, the joke was for the original Star Trek is you never wanted to wear red if you were on an actor on a Star Trek show because your part was going to last about 4 minutes. You got to walk on the set. You got to be part of the landing party. And when you landed, there was maybe 4 or 5 sentences, and then you died. Right? Because you were wearing the red shirt. Now, if you were really paying attention, look at some of the scenes where they actually show slave labor on some of the other planets that they were supposedly visiting. Somewhere there was red. Somewhere there was red. You know, do you enjoy the money you're getting for not working, Americans? Enjoy it now, because you're going to work for it later. Probably in a slave camp. Enjoy the life you have now, everybody who can't listen to me in China. Because you know what? Pretty soon you're going to be begging very, very hard for the life you used to know under an old regime, because it's going to seem like it was so much better. Wait a minute, that's just like the mixed multitude leaving Egypt, and they kept wanting to go back because it was better back there. Right? Enjoy what you've got today, world leaders, because you will suffer greatly. But there's hope. You know, the same hope that the Hebrews had in Egypt is the same hope we have today. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is hearing the screams of everybody who's living the way that he designed us to live. He heard the cries of the Hebrews in Egypt, and he hears you no matter where you might be on earth today. There is power. There is power when people come together. You know, in the Hebrew language, the word for one is echad. And there's only one letter difference between one and unity. That letter happens to be the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the Yud. It changes from echad, meaning one, to yachad, meaning unity. That small letter is also the first letter in the name Yehovah, the name of the creator of the universe. Think about that. You cannot have unity without the Almighty. But without the Almighty, you can certainly stand by yourself, and you can certainly fall by yourself. Everybody who comes together to live the way we are designed to live is unified in our Creator. Everybody who chooses to hear His voice and obey His commands, they are made one in His holy name. Evil is doing nothing because the only thing it knows how to do is divide and destroy. But our Creator creates. He brings people together, not as slave labor, but freed from their oppression and their oppression to sin. When you come together in the Almighty, it's far different than when you try to do it by yourself. You realize you can't do it by yourself, but you can do it because there is power in the mighty. Don't let the enemy divide you and tame you and destroy you. Don't let what's going on around the world continue. You have a voice, and that voice needs to be crying out to the only one that can help you. When you cry out to the Almighty today, just exactly like the Hebrew people did in Egypt when they cried out almost 4,000 years ago now, somebody heard them, and they sent Moses. Actually, they pulled Moses out. They sent him back, and he sent him back. He said, "Now you bring out everybody that I tell you to bring out." When it happens the next time, there's not going to be any mistake. It's going to be on a much grander scale, and everybody is going to know what's happening. There won't be, when that happened back then, and they finally 40 years later went into Egypt, or I went into the land, Canaan. The people in Jericho said, "We know what happened. We've heard the stories. We know what's going on." This next time, they're not going to hear the stories. They're going to see, and they're going to experience it all around the world. Be part of the people that win. And it's kind of easy to do that. All you have to do, if you're not sure about it, if you don't know, just go to givegod90.com. It's all laid out for you. You can turn your life around. You can improve your life. You can learn to live the way your Creator designed you to live. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Everybody in the United States, call your senators, call your representatives. Let them know how you feel about this tyranny that's going on.
Absolutely. It's, do I honestly believe something's going to happen that's going to change that? Probably not. But I can tell you this. You will receive payment for payment. That has already been written down. Guarantee it. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate all of you who listen, all of you who ask us questions or support us in any way. Until Monday, many, many blessings, everyone.